هيدر هيدر عم الآخر هيدر.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا وصلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Alhamdulillah, we have reached the third day of our third lesson in introductory logic. Last class we discussed the 5 relationships of concepts as they relate to themselves. And these were important in learning how to form a definition. So these 5 particular properties of any concept include 2 classifications. Either they are classifications of that concept or they are qualities of that concept. So the classifications include the genus and the species. The genus is to what category the concept belongs, the higher category. And the species is the individual members of the higher category to which it belongs. So a genus would, for example, be animals, and species would include people, monkeys, horses, humans, etc. Under qualities and characteristics, we have 3 separate things. We have the differentia, the particular accident, and the common accident. The differentia is that thing which differentiates each species from each other and makes it unique and makes it, in essence, a different thing, hence the term differentia. The particular accident is a thing that is unique to that concept. However, it does not make that concept unique in itself. So, for example, the property of a triangle having 180 degrees is unique to a triangle, but it does not make a triangle because the definition of a triangle is a 3-sided polygon, which is not the same thing as saying 180 degrees. Finally, the common accident are properties which are not unique to the concept. So, for example, the color brown is not a unique concept to a car, for example. It can be in a horse, it can be trees. Trees are brown as well. All of these things are not unique concepts, and hence they are called common accidents. So 5 aspects of any concept are the genus, the species, differentia, particular accident, and common accident. Now, when we're forming a good definition, what we want to do is we want to take the nearest genus, meaning the genus that is encompassing of the closest members, its closest relatives, and we want to take the furthest differentia, meaning we want to take the furthest thing that differentiates that member from all of its other individual members. So, for example, human's definition would be a thinking animal. And the reason for that is because animal is the nearest genus to human being, meaning that a human being possesses all animal qualities. In essence, a human being is also an animal, meaning that if we say human, we're also referring to animals as well. However, if we refer to animals, we're not always referring to humans. So what we want to do is we want to add the differentia, which allows us to distinguish between humans and the rest of animals, which is the differentia in this case is thinking animal. Now, here we have arrived at the 3rd lesson, which is signification. Now, we've learned how to think about concepts so far, and we've also learned how to define concepts, but we haven't learned how to necessarily talk about concepts. Signification is that thing by which we refer to concepts. So in a sense, it's metaphorically pointing to them. So if everyone goes by and is walking on the street and they see a rock and they point to it, they're signifying that rock. That is what we mean by signification. The signifier is pointing to the rock, and the rock is the signified thing, the concept. So essentially, the goal of signification is to be able to take these metaphorical rocks that are in all of our heads and be able to speak a word such that we can all think of the exact same thing in our head. So, for example, one concept can have infinitely number of many of signifiers, aka synonyms. So for example, if I said apple, right? I said apple, I get an image of an apple in my head, and that can be referred to with a number of words, including like in Urdu it would be seb, in Spanish it would be manzana. But all three of those words, apple, seb, manzana, all refer to the same concept in our head. So all three of those words are signifiers of that concept. Now, language in general is a tool of signification. It's the means by which we can refer to concepts and how we can be understood by people and how we can be. Assalamu alaikum, how are you doing? So signification is just a tool by which we can be understood. We can understand each other. We can talk to each other and understand what we're saying and not be confused. So I just mentioned the example of an apple, for example, right? When I say apple, what happens is I get the image of an apple in my head. And the words apple, manzana, seb, all three of those words are signifiers for the concept of apple, right? So now, sometimes, however, a word can also refer to multiple concepts as well. So in this case, it would be a homonym, right? So, for example, if I were to say a name of someone, so if I said Zaid, Zaid could refer to multiple people. But in my head, when I say Zaid, I'm only referring to one person, right? So what we want to do is we want to remove as much ambiguity as possible when we're signifying things. So when we say Zaid, it may be clear in a particular room. Let's say we're all sitting in a room together and there's a guy named Zaid. And if I said Zaid, I would only be referring to that guy in terms of my signifier of Zaid referring to that one concept of that guy sitting in the room with us. However, if we were just talking in the street and I just said Zaid, no one would know what I would be talking about because I haven't defined what Zaid is. So when we're signifying things, basically when we're speaking words, we have to define the words that we're speaking. So in the case of me being in the room, the definition of Zaid is implicit with me sitting in the same room as him. So let's go over that really quickly. So in signification, there's two ambiguous points. Either A, the word that we're using to refer to the concept, or B, the concept is not clear and the word we're using is universal. Meaning that if I said the one word, I could be referring to multiple different things. So if I said opinion, that word can mean many different things. It can mean an arbitrary opinion like do you like red or green, or it could mean a academic opinion. We don't know what we're referring to unless we define it and narrow it down in our heads. So in order to operate logically, we have to be very clear about these two things. The thing being signified and the signifier. If we both have a common signifier, we have to be very clear about the definition of that word that we're using. So when we point to a rock, we have to be clear that we're pointing to the same thing and we're not pointing to the street or the ground, we're all pointing to the rock. So in any debate, in any discussion, it is fully necessary to start by defining your terms. So, and we already discussed before in the last class how to define terms and what exactly that can do for us. So when we define terms, what do? We go from the nearest genus and the furthest differentia. And the reason why that's important is because this allows us to be very precise with our concepts. So when we talk about concepts, we have to be very precise. Otherwise we can't operate logically, because sometimes then a concept can be ambiguous and we won't be able to talk about it in many different ways. So when we say a definition, what we're doing is three very important things. We're being very precise in what we're discussing. We're also being understood by the other person. And we're also limiting and controlling the scope of discussion, right? So for example, if I were to say economic policy, I could be referring to a huge number of things. But if we were just talking in a very specific discussion and I said economic policy as it relates to like the Umayyad dynasty, then I would be limiting the discussion a great deal. So we have to define our terms before we speak them, because otherwise we won't be able to be understood by the other person. So when we're signifying, essentially this is a review of what we've just talked about. When we're signifying, there's two important points. Either number one, we have to have a common word that we're using in order to be understood. Now, once we have this common word, we also secondly have to understand that we're speaking about the same concept. And in order to do this, we have to define the term that we're using. So if I said apple, I have to define apple as in a red round fruit. And that, or I guess apple would mean like, yeah, sure, let's roll with that definition. A red round fruit, small red round fruit. I've had to define it. And now we can start discussing about apples because we have a common understanding. Once we have a common understanding, then it's only possible to discuss logically from there. So signification is the final part of the first unit. And I'd like to go over the whole unit from the beginning. So our unit started with trying to understand concepts in space, concepts in nature, meaning that how do we go from seeing different things and picking up on different things and understanding them as mental pictures or mental ideas that we can lift from just our basic senses into intellectual ideas. So the reason we're able to do this is through apprehension. Now, apprehension allows us to differentiate things within our environment, meaning we'll pick up on different things and we'll notice that they're all different in some way. And by noticing that they're all different in some way, we've picked up on their essence. Now, all of these essences are what we call concepts. Now, all these concepts can relate in many different ways. The next class we discussed that there were 4 different relationships between concepts, meaning that concepts as they relate to each other. So the first one of these relationships was that concepts can be exactly overlapping, meaning if you were to imagine 2 circles in your head and they were the exact same size and they were right on top of each other. The second way in which concepts can relate is if you imagine 2 circles in your head, one was smaller and one was bigger, and the smaller one was inside the bigger one, meaning that concept, if you refer to the smaller one, you're also referring to the bigger one, because the bigger one's essence is included within the smaller one. Now, the third relationship was that of a Venn diagram. So if you were to imagine 2 circles, one of them was partially overlapping over the other, meaning that they don't share a common essence, they don't share a common concept to each other, but they do share common members. But not necessarily that those members are conceptually similar. So, for example, if I said brown, right? Brown animals. So brown animals can include humans and horses, but humans and horses are not conceptually similar. And as a result, they do overlap. There are some brown horses and there are some white horses, and they do share a common reality of being brown, but they are not essentially similar. Hence, they are in the Venn diagram form. And then the fourth relationship is that there is no relationship. If you were to imagine 2 circles completely separate from each other, not linked in any way whatsoever, not sharing any common essence, not sharing any common members. And then after that, we discussed the 5 properties of concepts as they relate to themselves, meaning that what we just discussed in the beginning of this class as a review was that each concept, in summary, because I've beaten this idea like dead already, but in summary, the 5 concepts as they relate to themselves are helpful tools in determining what is important to define any concept. So the only 2 important bits are the genus and the differentia. Everything else is relatively unimportant. So we don't need to know whether or not like a mourning dove is white or brown in order to know what a mourning dove is. We don't need to know whether a car is white or brown in order to know what a car is. Basically, the point of these five concepts, these five aspects of any concept, is to be able to understand the essence of any given concept if you were to just spell it out to someone. And finally, so we've gone from conceptualizing things, meaning the first part, which is apprehension, affirmation, how all these apprehended things relate to each other is the second part we went through. The third part we went through is what are the properties and individual aspects of each of these concepts. And the fourth part we went through is defining how to define these concepts. And now the final aspect that we went over today is communicating concepts, signifying them. And in order to signify concepts, we have to use words, we have to use gestures, noises, whatever. Regardless, we have to be able to make it understood to another person that we're both referring to the same idea in our heads. Now, obviously, if you guys have any questions, please message me in private message. Thank you all for attending. Inshallah, I'll see you around. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.